We'll now move to the next sequence of this program, and that is our leadership panel, where we'll dive deeper into the challenges and opportunities in transforming food system. So joining our distinguished speakers here, allow me first to introduce the two additional panelists. Ladies first, I will start with you, Ambassador. Her Excellency Caroline Kitana Chipeta, Ambassador of the Republic of Tanzania to the Netherlands. Ambassador Chipeta has been a strong advocate for sustainable agricultural practices and food security initiatives in Tanzania and across Africa. And His Excellency Paul Gulleik Larsen, Special Envoy and Ambassador at Large for Food Security at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Norway. Mr. Larsen brings extensive diplomatic experience and has been at the forefront of Norway's efforts to address global food security challenges. So most welcome. Ambassador Caroline, you may take your seat and I will ask the questions while you're seated. Yes, please. Thank you very much. So, we've already, I think, with the keynote addresses from Godfrey, from Stephen, we have already set the scene for this conversation. Let me start with you, Godfrey. You already mentioned this important meeting you just attended in Harare. Can you tell us more about what happened there and the takeaways? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Marina. Right, so last week we were in Harare, Zimbabwe, on the 20th CAADP Partnership Platform meeting. Like I said, CAADP is the Comprehensive Africa Agriculture Development Program, which has been running for 20 years, actually 21 now. And so every year we hold a meeting that brings together the CAADP constituency. Governments on the African continent, the private sector, civil society, farm organizations, academia, researchers, and our development partners. So we come together every year to hold discussions, not in a political environment, but for the stakeholders that support the implementation of CAADP. So this was the 20th edition of that platform. And during the platform, you have several topics that get discussed. You have side events and so on. So in one of the plenary sessions, we had a discussion around the implementation of the Africa Fertilizer and Soil Health Summit outcomes, the 10-year action plan, together with the declaration. The summit was held in May this year in Nairobi, Kenya, as I mentioned earlier, and so stakeholders are keen to see beyond the declaration and an action plan, exactly what should take place to happen. So discussions have been going on between May and now. And so in Harare, it was a reflection to say, where are we now taking stock and what should we be doing? So let me share with you the highlights of what the stakeholders in that platform discussed. One strong message that came out is that the international community ought to support African institutions to strengthen their leadership role in the implementation of this action plan. A very strong demand that African institutions must be in the lead in the implementation of the action plan and declaration. But because the continent is huge and there are multiple players in that space, they also called for strong coordination of the different players on the continent to make sure that everybody is moving in the same direction. And as such, the Forum for Agriculture Research in Africa, FARA, was designated by our commissioner as the institution that is going to support the coordination of the implementation of the action plan and declaration on the continent. So that was a bold step moving forward because our international partners have been looking for us to take that step to say, how is the coordination of implementation going to happen? So that was also a strong outcome from Harare. The third outcome was the need to engage with governments because we know the implementation of the action plan has multiple players. Governments themselves, the private sector, civil society, development partners. But at the end of it all, governments play a very important role. And so there was a strong discussion to say we need to have very bold and candid discussions with governments to be able to come through with the commitments, especially around creating an environment for private sector to invest in, especially the production of fertilizers on the continent. Because one of the outcomes from the Nairobi Declaration was a strong call for increased investment in fertilizer production on the continent. And I should add both organic and inorganic fertilizers on the continent, and also improve the distribution mechanisms to reach the last farmer in the rural area. So having a candid discussion with governments to meet their commitments was the third strong message that came out. The fourth one, which is related to what I just said, is the strong engagement with Africa's private sector to invest in fertilizer production and distribution on the continent. The last message that came out, two more. The other one that came out was the need to strengthen the capacity of the Africa Fertilizer and Development Center. There is a center in Zimbabwe that was created before I was born, but it has not received the attention that it needed. And so we are in discussions to see how to increase the capacity, to strengthen the capacity of that institution, because as the name says, the Africa Center for Fertilizer Development. It's supposed to support experimentation around fertilizer utilization, application and utilization, but also strengthening the capacity on the African continent. And so we would like to call upon partners to work with the African Union to ensure that center is supported. And because we were in Harare, the Minister of Agriculture was very strong on this call, of obvious reasons, to see that that center is strengthened on the continent. Lastly, in terms of improving governance across the continent, there are regional hubs around fertilizers and soil health that are being established. In West Africa, the hub for West Africa is already established. The ones for Eastern and Southern Africa, the discussions are ongoing to establish regional hubs, and also discussions are starting to take place to establish also a regional hub on fertilizer and soil health for Central Africa. Finally, we also heard from the Africa Development Bank. The Africa Development Bank hosts the Africa Fertilizer Financing Mechanism, which is intended to be an instrument that has resources that our member states can access to make investments in fertilizers. And they said they are expanding their investment to $1 billion. So if that happens, then our member states will have access to a strong instrument that can support investments to improve fertilizers and soil health on the continent. So those were the big takeaways that I picked during that session in Harare last week. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Godfrey. I think very clear actions there. And I think in this audience we have stakeholders from different backgrounds who I'm sure will be engaging further on this with you later on. And as it's very clear that soil health is an important topic for the African Union Commission. So can you share with us any other initiatives that are undertaken to ensure that food security and poverty reduction, poverty is reduced across the continent?
Well, on that note, basically what I shared in the keynote address summarizes the continent aspirations over the next 10 years. But just to maybe to expound a little bit more, I mean, we recognize the importance of soil health in boosting agricultural productivity on the continent. As you know, in the majority of countries, especially that are highly populated, the average size is anywhere from 2 acres to 2.5 acres. And those farms are farmed season after season without replenishing the nutrients in the soils. And what that means that over time, productivity has been declining. And so if you look ahead and you say, what's going to happen to these farmers over the next 10, 15 years if nothing is done to restore the health of the soils? It means you'll have degraded soils, but more importantly, households that may not be able to feed themselves off of that land because of the lost nutrient content without replenishment. So the discussion around improving soil health is real in the majority of African countries. Mm-hmm. And so in the 10-year CAADP strategy and action plan that I mentioned earlier, that will be adopted by our heads of state and government, we have actions in there, mm-hmm. And also aspirations on how, on the type of investments or actions that are needed to be taken by our member states, but also by the farmers themselves to be able to invest in improving soil health. It's not easy. We don't have all the answers, because if you look at it, some of the easier practices around soil health is following, meaning you leave land to rejuvenate itself naturally. But that's a huge ask for a farmer that has 2.5 acres, yeah, that they depend on. A portion has cassava, a portion has sweet potatoes, a portion has maize, and so on. And you are saying one of the measures you would like you to take is to leave a portion of your farm fallow for 1 or 2 seasons. What will they be doing during that period? So the questions are real, the answers are not easy, and so part of what we would like to learn from wherever, because some of the lessons are available on the continent, some of the solutions may be available globally. How would you solve that problem of that small-scale farmer with 2 acres of land that they must farm every day, every season, to feed their families? So what technologies or practices are available or can be made available to make sure that they still farm every season, but they can take on board those measures that are going to sustain soil health to be able to feed their households and generate also extra incomes to meet other household needs? These are real questions, and we are looking for solutions. But I can assure you, in the 10-year CAADP strategy and action plan, there is space for, to be able to address those challenges and make sure that we have sustainable agri-food systems on the continent.
Thank you, Godfrey, and I think that's why we're here. That's why it's good that you were able to join us. And this symposium is taking place here in the Netherlands. The Netherlands is known as an important player in development cooperation in the field of agriculture. My question is for you, Stephen. How does the Dutch government prioritize soil health in its development programs, and what lessons can be drawn from the Dutch practices in sustainable agriculture? You already started talking about it during your keynote address, but please expand more. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Let me be brief also for other speakers to have their turns. But yeah, for us, we increasingly focus on food security next to water management and health, mainly reproductive health and rights, as priorities of the Dutch government in international cooperation. And I think focus is of essence, because still food security is a very broad topic, right? Mm-hmm. Now, what we've been learning, as I alluded to in my introduction, is that the issue of soil management and healthy soils is an issue which you need to integrate within your food security strategy. and which is also very specific to specific localities. So I'm happy that the previous speaker alluded to the individual farmer and the farming practice, because farming practices are very different, not only between the Netherlands and, say, the African continent, if you want to take it as at large, but very specifically between farmers in one region over the other. And has to do with economics, has to do with access to resources. So solutions cannot be blueprints, and I think that's one of the lessons we all learned here, meaning that we need to be very targeted and specific. And we need then to bundle knowledge and expertise, but also capacity development in a way which is sensible. And therefore, I'm really happy that we have this leadership from the African Union, because then we know in which policy framework to target our interventions. And not to repeat myself, but that Soils Values program in West Africa is really sort of helping us making that work and integrating that in the food systems discussions we have with our West African partners.
Thank you very much, Stephen. And I will build on what you said to move to Caroline. Godfrey mentioned the enormous challenges, and Stephen also mentioned how important it is to be specific, that context matter. So we are going to zoom on Tanzania. The challenges are there. And but the country is also known as a country that has a rich biodiversity, yet still facing challenges related to soil degradation. So, Caroline, how does Tanzania balance agricultural productivity, soil health, and climate resilience in its development plans?
Thank you so much, Marina. Maybe I should say it's more relaxing answering the questions while I'm sitting down. I can move around much better. First of all, since I'm taking the floor for the first time, I would like to commend IFDC for commemorating its 50th anniversary, and in the course of doing so, coming up with this very important symposium. And we all know how important soil health is, and the need to put our efforts together cannot be overemphasized. So congratulations, IFDC. And with all the knowledge and the expertise that we have in this room, I believe we might not leave the day with all the answers, but I'm sure we will have moved from one space to the other in heading to the right direction. And before I get to how my country balances the challenges that come out of the productivity, soil health, and food security, I would like to reiterate and say what I think we all know. All the three subjects are very interdependent. There's no way you can have one without the other. I don't see how we can attain food security if we do not have healthy soil. But at the same time, without the healthy soil, we cannot increase productivity. So we all have to work in all the three subjects to where we want to get to. For Tanzania, increased production and productivity is one of the main and the first priority, actually, of the 6 agricultural development plans that the government has put in place. And how do we do this? How do we attain this? How do we try to move on the challenges to get to where we think will help the country? Because agriculture is the backbone of our country. It has been, it still is. So lots has been done by the government, especially now. The government led by Her Excellency Dr. Samia Suluhu Hassan has put so much emphasis on agriculture. And first of all, it has conducted environmental and social management to protect the land and soil health. It conducts soil testing and trains farmers on good agricultural practices for maintaining or improving the soil health. Most of developing countries, Tanzania especially, smallholders are the farmers. So we need to have the smallholders understand the importance of changing from the traditional practices of farming to the modern ones that will help improve our soil. We've just heard from an expert here saying, how can you tell these people with just a 1 acre that you have to practice fallow kind of farming? what are they going to eat? But then we need to change their mindset. So the government has come up with different kind of trainings, and it has gone further and started a certain initiative that uses agricultural extension officers who goes all the way, and they're placed in the regions, in the districts and villages, and they work with the farmers and training them the importance of soil health, the importance of crop protection, the importance of agroforestry in the course of their farming. So we do this as well by having development partners. IFDC is one of them. IFDC has been working in Tanzania for a while. It works with our research institutes, the Tanzania Agricultural Research Institutes, where it provides trainings. It does researches on fertilizers and the use of organic fertilizers on pesticides, which in turn would help the farmers actually in whatever they do, they will yield more. And because they yield more, it's going to change their livelihood. And as such, then they will be ready to contribute to what plans or actions and the policies that the government has come up with. Because otherwise, then the government will be just talking to itself. And another way that the government is doing is has also invested in allocating resources on the soil testing in order to apply nutrients adequately. Irrigation also, it has allocated a lot of funds in infrastructure irrigation. It goes out looking identified areas that are prone to drought and change it into being areas that could be used as for agriculture all throughout the time. Because for a very long time and traditionally, people would wait for the season. This is the rain season, this is where we can farm. But now the government is trying to change that mindset, that we can do it throughout the year. But how do we do it? So it allocates resources on that. Mm-hmm. And in most cases, as I've said, we work with our development partners in doing that. We've got other development partners who come in with fertilizers. They'll come and help on research on fertilizers. They distribute fertilizers, but again, go out and try and do the soil health practices all the way to the villages. We've got those who do soil testing, and so far it has been, the government has done soil testing in 18 regions out of the 31 regions in Tanzania. And this is an ongoing process, and making sure that we get to all the 31 regions so we know what we are doing where. Mm-hmm. The emphasis is still that traditionally, again, we know food comes from the soil. Mm. So we have to make sure that we have healthy soil in order for us to be able to curb or get to the goal that we're all looking for of having food security.
Thank you very much, Caroline. Very good to hear these initiatives undertaken in Tanzania. Now let's move to you, Paul. Norway is also a very important international partner, and recently the country has committed 33 million Norwegian crowns to support the implementation of this Ambition 10-year action plan for improving soil fertility in African countries. Why is it so important for Norway?
Well, thank you, Marina. It's very good to be here on behalf of my Minister for Development to support IFDC at 50, also with our great partners in the African Union. And we're very pleased to hear from Godfrey about the Harare meeting leading up to the Kampala summit, where we are chairing the donor group and supporting the new 10-year post-Malabo plan. And of course, with Tanzania, our oldest development partner since 1961, and one of the largest partners still. And of course, the Netherlands, always very solid and one of our best donor partners in the donor groups. Now, why Nairobi Declaration follow-up is so important? Well, because for Norway, Africa and food security are the #1 priority now. It's not only development policy, but also foreign policy. And Africa and food security are basically two sides of the same coin in our work. Also in terms of funding, I mean, the 33 million you mentioned is a small part of the overall funding that this government has provided for food security in its time in office. I think must be more than $1 billion, which is a record level for food security from, and I hope and I think it will continue. It also includes 100 million kroner for the African fertilizer financing mechanism, which I now hear his ambition is to go to $1 billion. And hopefully that will happen because it's such an important mechanism which we fund and hope will help Tanzania and others to really boost quality fertilizer, to including also small holder farmers, because that's really, in our view, and the same as Netherlands, smallholder farmers, often women, often hungry, struggling to feed the families, need more attention, as well as, of course, general farming and agriculture production. When we talk about finance, last week or 2 weeks ago, my minister was at the World Bank meetings and very encouraged by the strong attention given to food security by the World Bank president. And we hope and believe that the IDA funding for the least developed countries from the World Bank will be more targeted to food security in the future. We are pushing for that. Netherlands is pushing for that. And there's a lot of money and there's a lot of leverage in those IDA dollars from the World Bank. And on top of that, or in addition to that, we want more climate finance to go to food security, and in particular smallholder farmers, which today get less than 1% of climate finance. And adaptation to climate is so crucial. Seeds, fertilizer for these smallholder farmers. So why is Africa so important? Well, you mentioned, Godfrey, the 20% hungry, close to 300 million people. Poverty is, of course, a priority in our development cooperation policies, and we are far from reaching SDG 2, the Sustainable Development Goal on hunger. So you need more agriculture production. You need to support self-sufficiency, food sovereignty, as Henk mentioned, even though we know, and I know from my time as a World Food Program director, that a lot of the hunger is directly caused by conflict and by warring parties using food as a weapon of war, but you still need more food in the market. And the figure that I've heard for food imports from the Africa Development Bank, Godfrey, you mentioned 50, 60 billion, but some people think it's going to be more than 100 billion, maybe already next year, import to Africa, which is a breadbasket, should be fully able to support and grow their own food if you get the quality fertilizer then that you need. And of course, there's a foreign policy and security policy aspect to this. We want to show Africa that we are a committed and a good partner for African-led plans and projects. And this is now more important than ever after the Russian invasion and full-scale war against Ukraine, which is not only a brutal and total break of international law, but has also disrupted markets for grain and fertilizers, leading to higher prices and complications. And that's why, of course, in the geopolitical environment that we see, for us to have Africa, and for Netherlands and Norway and other like-minded countries to be able to work with Africa in the UN to uphold international law and to show ourselves as partners for development and food security in Africa is very important. And in this context, soil health and fertilizer is really a crucial pillar for food systems and food security and the transformation of food system. And there we come to the environmental aspects, the biodiversity aspects, the climate change aspects, because as we said and saw at the COP, the climate conference last year in the Emirates, which issued actually a groundbreaking declaration on food security within the context of climate change, was that you need to help sustainable agriculture, soil health and fertilizer to prevent further destruction of biodiversity. This was an issue in Colombia last week in Collet at the COP for biodiversity, but also will be next week when we go to Baku for the COP29, and we'll continue to push that, you know, this link with food security is so crucial now in the time ahead when we're going to the COP next year in Brazil. And Brazil, very important partner for all of us now, after their G20 chair lifted food security to the top and hunger to the top of the agenda. And we have joined their alliance, Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty. And we hope, and we also have another alliance, which I'll talk more about later, with Brazil and Sierra Leone. But we see and hope that South Africa will continue to lift food security in their G20 chair next, which starts actually in December. And finally, I just want to mention one concrete initiative that we have taken and launched with the United States at the World Bank meetings last week, where we launched a fund, so-called First Loss Fund for small and medium-sized agribusiness in Africa. We put $35 million from our side, US the same. I think UK, Korea, maybe also Netherlands and others will come in and join, so this fund becomes big, because what it does and will do with the professional advice from investment and company in Paris, led by Severino, by the way, who used to lead the AFD. This fund is supposed to reduce the risk of bank lending to small and medium-sized agribusiness that cannot get credits now because they are too small and risky for bank lending, but they're also too big for microfinance. So we want to help this space by putting funds forward for first loss to reduce the risk so they can actually go to bank, get credits, and be able to provide the smallholders and other farmers in the rural areas with the fertilizers and seeds and other input that they desperately need to increase their own production and productivity. This fund is called FASA for short, F-A-S-A, and will be hopefully, and I think very important mechanism in the follow-up to our 4 donor or development partner commitments from the Nairobi for the 10-year action plan that you asked me about. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul, and I will build on that. You mentioned these funds to support small and medium enterprises, agribusiness enterprises in Africa. I want to zoom on the role of this private sector. Now we're talking here about the African private sector, but I would also like to add international private sector. What role, why is it so important to involve them as partners for this, for food security in Africa, and also on the soil health, to advance soil health in Africa? And this is a question to you, Stephen.
Well, maybe a few words. I mean, I think the example is excellent, the last example of investment. And also there, a partnership, in my view, means that we need sort of systemic solutions, meaning that if the market fails on providing financial services to smallholders to better their lands, then we need systemic solutions, meaning market solutions that work on the mainstay of the market. So these initiatives, fantastic, and we are linking our initiatives to them. They are really important for the private sector actually to be performing in the mainstay of the market, because then the financing or the financial services will be transformative. Same with extension services. I was blessed by starting my career in Tanzania, so Mama Balozi is very close to my heart. But we there also have been working with government on extension, and extension, as we learned in the Netherlands, can never be a fully public enterprise because you cannot afford it. So we need to actually break it down into what part is public. The public needs to set the policies, the environment, and how can we then bring in a sustainable, economically sustainable way, private extensionism. And therefore you need public-private cooperation. And the international private sector, I think, can bring in the finance, the expertise, also the offtake in terms of market, but also, and as I said in my introduction, the investment. So we have many companies investing into African countries and adding value to the economies.
Thank you, Stephen. Paul, would you like to?
No, I mean, not surprisingly, coming from a similarly, let's say, successful market economy as the Netherlands, Norway, we fully agree. You need the markets, you need to have pro-market policies. I mean, subsidies can be a good thing for smallholder farmers to help them out, but not to distort how the market functions. I think that's crucial that big players like Yara of Norway, which is a state-owned partly company and providing a lot of important quality fertilizer to the African partners, even though it's hard in this context now to compete with cheap Russian imports, for example. We hope that Yara will still be a very important partner for Tanzania and other countries, because they're also doing very good work in basically for the long term. One example, which also relates to the donor commitments from Nairobi Declaration, is that they are working to create a digital and data system to map the health of soil at the ground level in Africa in order to be able to exactly determine how fertilizers should be used. And this would be, we are supporting it from the government side. We hope others will also come in to support their efforts, because they put a lot of their own money into this, which will be a platform. And we have Yara here. They can talk more about it themselves, because I'm not an expert. But this is basically trying to create a global public good, an open platform where farmers in Africa can actually access, and governments, data about the plots and the soil, which varies so much from area to area. As I said, I'm not an expert, I cannot get into details, but this is a very interesting project, and it links to the data point, the second point of our commitments from that we made with Netherlands and others from the Nairobi 10-year action plan.
Thank you very much, Paul. For the sake of time, I'm going to conclude with a final question to all of you. If we had to look forward and we were to contribute to a global action plan to achieve soil health and food security for all, what long-term strategies would you propose to ensure that soil health becomes a key driver to make food security a reality for all? A one-liner, two-liner. Let me start with you, Godfrey.
Well, you have another one? I want to continue with this?
No, just a one-liner. That's why I was so specific.
Yes, so I think given where we are, strengthening partnerships between Africa and our development partners is going to be needed. I mentioned the 10-year CADAP strategy and action plan that was endorsed by our ministers 2 weeks ago in Addis Ababa. And in there, it calls for strengthened partnerships between the African Union and our global development partners. So, the call is for development partners to align both their technical and financial support towards Africa's strategy and action plan. So that is our call. Do not develop programs and support them outside of what has been agreed by the continent as the Common Development Agenda.
Thank you very much, Godfrey. Steve?
I would say put female farmers center stage, not as an object, but as a subject.
Thank you.
Strong partnership should be, I think, the first that we should look into. But again, we should have strategies that take into account on the specific needs in specific areas. And involvement of youth and women should also be taken into account and looked into in a very, I think, positive and strong way. Because for a long time, youth would think agriculture is not for them. It didn't appeal to them. But youth is the workforce in all developing countries. So bringing youth in and coming out with initiative that will appeal to the youth should be one of the strategies that we should look into.
Thank you very much, Caroline. And lastly, Paul?
Yes, agree with everything. And of course, the governments of Africa and the African Union, they have to be in the lead. They have to be the ones who set the plans and the projects. We, as partners, will support and come in. And we will join with partnerships, of course, with private sector, as you said, but also in terms of trying to meet the challenges of food security within the context of climate change commitments and biodiversity commitments. And I mentioned the Alliance of Champions for Food Systems Transformation, which we launched at the Dubai or Emirates meeting climate conference last year. Now we are in co-chairing with Sierra Leone and Brazil. Rwanda is a member, and we are now approaching a smaller number of very key governments, including Tanzania. We've sent a letter to you to also join this effort, which is focusing on whole of government approaches, how to find the right balance between, increasing food production on the land that exists without destroying more forest or biodiversity, and also keeping the climate commitments, which are very important, both in terms of, how to produce more food without undermining biodiversity and climate change, but also, as it says in the Paris Agreement, how to reduce emissions in a manner that does not threaten food security. That's also very important, the other way around.
Thank you very much, Paul. Thank you very much to all my panelists here for the insightful discussion. Please give them a big hand if you've also enjoyed this conversation.